welcome to the Deep Dive podcast channel.
Great to be here.
Today we're looking at something that's, well, woven into the fabric of pretty much all our daily lives, social media. But instead of just scrolling past the usual headlines, we're going to delve into how these platforms interact with our minds, our emotions, that deeper sense of well-being.
It's a crucial conversation to have.
It really is. It's quite something to consider how these tools, when meant to connect us, can sometimes leave us feeling, I don't know, a little less connected, maybe more drained.
That's a very common experience. We tend to think of social media as simply a utility, maybe a neutral space even.
Right.
But it's actually operating within the very intricate world of our psychology and, importantly, our neurobiology, too.
Okay.
Understanding that interplay is, well, it's really key if we want to navigate it in a healthier way.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's unpack how social media engages with our nervous systems. You said it's almost like it's speaking a kind of new language. Can you elaborate on that?
Certainly. Let's consider the fundamental mechanisms at play here. Think about notifications, likes, shares, all those little pings.
Yep, we all know them.
Well, these trigger the release of dopamine in the brain. Now, while we often just think dopamine equals pleasure, its primary role here is really about driving that sense of anticipation, that seeking of a reward.
Ah, okay. So it's the wanting, not just the getting.
Precisely. So each notification becomes this little signal like, hey, maybe this time I'll get that positive feedback. And that creates a loop, right? A craving for more. It's very similar to other habit-forming behaviors. And what's particularly compelling from a design perspective is the unpredictability of these rewards. That's called variable reward reinforcement.
Like a slot machine.
Exactly like a slot machine.
Yeah.
That intermittent reinforcement actually makes the behavior, the checking, much more ingrained.
It really is like a slot machine for our attention, isn't it? We keep pulling the lever, checking our phones, because we just don't know when we'll hit that little jackpot of validation.
That's a perfect analogy.
And, if you're finding this kind of exploration into our daily digital lives interesting, maybe how our brains are interacting with this stuff, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel.
Yeah.
And please do share any thoughts or questions that pop up in the comments. We're always really keen to hear your perspectives on this.
Absolutely. And then layered on top of that dopamine loop, you have the endless scroll.
Right. The infinite feed.
It's specifically designed to constantly feed our brains with novelty. Something new, something different, always just a flick away.
Our brains like novelty, don't they?
They do. Our nervous systems are naturally attuned to new information. It's a survival thing, historically. But the sheer volume and the relentless pace of content on these platforms, it can just be overwhelming, especially perhaps for a system that's already easily overstimulated.
That makes a lot of sense. It feels like we're constantly searching for that next interesting thing, but it's like trying to take a sip from a fire hose sometimes.
Good way to put it.
So moving beyond just the sort of mechanics of the platforms themselves, there's this whole other massive aspect of social comparison.
Oh, yes.
We're constantly exposed to these very curated, often very polished versions of other people's lives.
Exactly. Social media often becomes a highlight reel, doesn't it? It showcases the best moments, the most flattering photos, the seemingly endless successes and perfect holidays.
Yeah.
And it's an almost automatic human tendency, really, to engage in social comparison. We see where we stand relative to others.
It's how we gauge things.
Right. But the danger arises when we start mistaking these carefully constructed snapshots for the complete, often quite messy reality of someone's life.
Which is easy to do when that's all you see.
It is, and this can very easily lead to feelings of inadequacy, that sense of always falling short or just not measuring up somehow.
And I can imagine this is particularly amplified when we start talking about body image. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, they're just saturated with often unrealistic or heavily filtered aesthetics.
That's a really critical point. The algorithms on these platforms frequently promote very specific body types, heavily edited images, certain looks.
You see the same things over and over.
You do, and repeated exposure to these idealized, often frankly unattainable standards can significantly impact how we feel about our own bodies. This is especially true for younger individuals, but really for anyone with pre-existing body image concerns.
Is there research on this?
Yes, quite a bit. For example, I recall a study from 2021 which specifically linked increased Instagram use to greater body dissatisfaction among teenage girls.
Wow.
This constant visual input, it can actually subtly shift our perception of what's normal or desirable. It can reinforce some pretty harmful beauty standards and unfortunately trigger feelings of shame quite easily.
It's more than just, like, wanting to look a certain way. It sounds like our brains are being subtly trained to accept these filtered realities as the norm, which is quite disturbing when you think about it.
It is.
This also makes me think about how our bodies themselves react to what happens online. It's not all just in our heads, is it? These feelings, they're physical too.
Not at all. You're absolutely right. Social media can activate very primal, very old survival responses.
Like fight or flight.
Exactly.
Uh.
Think about it. A negative comment, or even just feeling ignored or excluded online, that can trigger our fight response. You see it in defensiveness, online arguments.
Okay.
Then the constant influx of potentially distressing news or just overwhelming information that can trigger flight, which might manifest as that urge to just keep scrolling through bad news, what people call doom scrolling.
Right, trying to escape by diving deeper in,
Yeah.
paradoxically.
Precisely. And sometimes the sheer overstimulation can lead to a freeze response, feeling numb, detached, unable to process.
Mhm.
And then there's fawn, that need for online validation, for likes, for positive comments. It can be a form of fawning, essentially seeking safety by trying to please others in the digital space.
Wow, that's a really powerful connection, seeing these ancient survival mechanisms playing out because of, I don't know, a Facebook post or a tweet.
Our nervous system doesn't always make neat distinctions between digital threats and physical ones.
And you mentioned earlier, maybe just touching on this, that for individuals with a history of trauma, things like PTSD, complex PTSD, maybe from childhood experiences, these online cues can be particularly potent triggers.
Yes, absolutely. For those who have experienced trauma, their nervous systems are often already sensitized. So even subtle online interactions can be deeply triggering.
Like what sort of things?
Well, a perceived slight in a comment, a tone that feels critical even if it wasn't intended, a sense of being excluded from an online group, or even just seeing others' success. It can subconsciously reactivate old wounds. It can lead to quite significant nervous system dysregulation.
So what looks like maybe procrastination or someone being obsessed with checking notifications.
Exactly. Or even engaging in online conflicts repeatedly. It could actually be an old survival pattern kicking in, trying to find safety or control in a way that made sense in the past.
It gives us a completely different lens to understand our own online habits, and maybe others too. It's not just about, say, a lack of willpower. It could be these deeper ingrained responses.
That's a much more compassionate view, I think.
Definitely. Okay, let's maybe focus on some specific areas of mental health. How does this constant connectivity impact something like anxiety, for instance?
Well, the constant stream of notifications, the potential for social comparison, the news cycle, it can create a state of hyper-alertness.
Like being constantly on.
Exactly. It's like our brains are constantly on standby waiting for that next ping, that next update. For individuals already prone to anxiety, this can really amplify feelings of unease, restlessness. It can create this persistent, low-grade sense of almost danger. Plus the pressure, to stay informed, to respond quickly to messages, to maintain a certain online presence. It all contributes to that feeling of being perpetually on edge.
And what about the connection we often hear about between social media and depression?
This ties back strongly to the social comparison point we discussed. Constantly seeing what appear to be perfect, happy lives can significantly deepen feelings of isolation and inadequacy for someone already struggling with depression.
Right. That internal narrative of why can't I be like them?
Yeah.
Or what's wrong with me?
Precisely. That narrative can become much louder, more entrenched. Depression often thrives in silence and isolation, and ironically, social media, while, intended to connect, can sometimes exacerbate this when other people's apparent joy feels like a confirmation of one's own perceived failures.
That's tough.
And there's also some research and thinking around the concept of anhedonia. Anhedonia is basically a difficulty or inability to experience pleasure from activities usually found enjoyable. The theory suggests that the constant, intense stimulation of dopamine receptors by social media might, over time, lead to them becoming less sensitive. So everyday pleasures feel less pleasurable.
Wow, so the very thing giving us those little hits could actually dull our ability to feel good from other things.
That's the concern, yes. It's an area of ongoing research.
It's a really stark contrast, the promise of connection versus this potential for increased isolation and maybe even dulled pleasure. Now, I know many people with ADHD find themselves really drawn to the fast-paced, high-stimulus content, especially on platforms like TikTok or Twitter. What's happening there?
Yeah, that's very common. For individuals with ADHD, the allure of short, punchy, engaging content with rapid transitions is often very strong. It kind of aligns with the brain's natural tendency in ADHD to seek novelty and stimulation.
So it scratches an itch, so to speak.
It can, yes. However, this constant exposure can also, paradoxically, intensify distractibility. It can contribute to decision fatigue, just too many choices, too much input. And it can certainly lead to sensory overstimulation quite easily.
So the very features that make these platforms appealing might also exacerbate some of the core challenges associated with ADHD.
That's often the dynamic, yes. It's a complex relationship.
And finally, on this point, how does this whole digital world, this performance space, affect our fundamental sense of self-worth?
That's a big one. We see many people, perhaps increasingly, developing a sense of self-esteem that is heavily reliant on external online validation.
Likes, comments, followers.
Exactly. The number of likes, the positive comments, the follower count, the overall performance online. When our sense of worth becomes tied primarily to these external metrics, it can really erode our intrinsic self-worth.
That deeper internal sense of value.
Yes, that internal sense that you are valuable regardless of external approval or performance. Identity can start to feel like something you have to curate and perform rather than an authentic expression of who you are.
That sounds exhausting.
It can be incredibly draining. And therapists who work with these issues often highlight how social media cleverly taps into our fundamental human need for belonging.
Which we all have.
But it can also exploit our deep-seated fear of rejection, making that online validation feel even more crucial, almost like a survival need.
It really paints a complex picture. I mean, it's not all negative, though, is it? We have to acknowledge that social media can also be a really important source of connection and support for many people.
Absolutely. No, it's crucial to hold that duality. It's not inherently good or bad. It's how we engage with it and how it's designed. For many people, especially perhaps those in marginalized communities or maybe neurodivergent individuals, social media can be a vital lifeline. It can provide a sense of community that might be missing offline. It offers a space for validation, finding others with shared experiences, and it can be an incredibly powerful tool for self-expression and advocacy.
Finding your tribe, finding your voice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sharing your experiences, finding others who truly understand. Campaigning for causes you believe in, these can be incredibly empowering uses of the platforms.
But even within those positive spaces, there can be a bit of a shadow side, right? That feeling of being watched or judged, or the pressure to conform even within a niche group.
Yes, that's definitely present too. The fear of online judgment, the potential for harassment or misunderstandings, the pressures of cancel culture, whether real or perceived. It can lead individuals to self-censor, to hold back their true thoughts and feelings. There can be this pressure to constantly perform, even within supportive communities, to present an idealized version of oneself, which, as you said, can be emotionally exhausting and ultimately lead to feelings of inauthenticity. And what's really fascinating here, neurologically speaking, is that our nervous system, as we touched on, can't always distinguish between digital exclusion or criticism and real-life physical danger.
So a nasty comment can feel like a genuine threat.
On a physiological level, yes. It helps explain why a negative online comment or being unfriended can sometimes feel so disproportionately impactful. Our basic wiring is reacting.
Okay, so given all of this complexity, the dopamine, the comparison, the survival responses, the good, the bad, what are some practical steps we can actually take? How can we navigate social media in a more mindful, maybe more compassionate way?
Great question. There are several strategies people find helpful. One of the most impactful, I think, is to consciously curate your feed. Be intentional.
What does that look like?
It means actively unfollowing accounts that consistently leave you feeling drained, inadequate, or just generally negative, and then proactively seeking out and following content that is genuinely uplifting, informative, inspiring, or simply resonates with you in a positive way.
Thinking of it like a diet.
Exactly. Think of your social media consumption as part of your overall mental and emotional diet. Are you feeding yourself junk food or nourishing content?
That's a great analogy. A digital diet. I like that. What else can we do?
Setting time boundaries is really crucial for many people. This means designating specific times of day for checking social media.
Like only morning and evening.
Could be. Or maybe just during a lunch break. The point is to make a conscious effort to log out and stay logged out outside of those chosen times. Avoid that mindless habitual checking.
And maybe use those screen time tools on our phones.
Yes, definitely utilize those tools, but frame it positively. See them not as a form of punishment or restriction, but as a way to establish healthy self-care boundaries. You're protecting your time and energy.
Okay, so being intentional with when and what we engage with. What about how we engage? Like in the moment.
That's where somatic awareness comes in, paying attention to your body's signals.
Somatic means body-based, right?
Yes. So after spending even just a short amount of time scrolling, do a quick check-in with your body. Notice any physical sensations. Is your jaw clenched? Is your breathing shallow? Are your thoughts racing?
Little signals.
Exactly. These can be subtle but important indicators from your nervous system that maybe it's time to pause, to step away. Taking even just a minute to stretch, take a few deep breaths, or engage your senses in your immediate physical environment can be really grounding.
It's about building that awareness, that mind-body connection, even when we're interacting with something digital.
Precisely. You can also explore some of the apps designed to introduce a brief pause before you open a social media platform.
Oh, I've heard those. Like a little speed bump.
Kind of. They often make you wait a few seconds or answer a quick question like, why are you opening this app?
Mm-hmm.
The goal isn't really to control your behavior long term, but to create that tiny space for conscious choice. It allows you to ask yourself, do I really want or need to engage right now, or is this just habit?
Just interrupting the automatic pilot.
Exactly. And finally, perhaps most importantly, practice self-compassion while you're scrolling.
How so?
Remind yourself actively that what you're seeing is often that highly curated highlight reel we talked about. It's not the full, messy, complex picture of someone's life. When you feel envy or comparison creep in, try to reframe it gently, maybe with understanding or even wishing that person well, rather than letting it diminish your own sense of self.
Be kind to yourself about those feelings.
Yes. Acknowledge the feeling, understand where it might be coming from, the platform's design, our human tendencies, and then let it go without judgment.
These are all really actionable steps, aren't they? It feels like it's about shifting from just passive consumption to more active, conscious, and mindful engagement.
That's the goal, taking back some agency.
This has been incredibly insightful. Seriously, thank you for diving deep into this with me today. It's given me a lot to think about.
My pleasure. It really is a conversation we all probably need to have with ourselves regularly.
Totally agree. So as we wrap up, maybe some reflective questions for you, the listener, to ponder. How do you typically feel physically, emotionally, after spending time on social media? What are you truly hoping to gain or find when you open those apps? Is it connection, information, distraction, validation? And thinking about your whole self, what aspects feel fulfilled or nurtured online, and what aspects maybe feel a little neglected or even diminished?
Good questions to sit with.
Yeah. And remember, this whole discussion isn't really about demonizing technology or abandoning social media altogether. For most of us, that's not realistic or even desirable.
It's about awareness and relationship.
Exactly. It's about fostering a healthier, more conscious relationship with it. Understanding those subtle yet really powerful ways these platforms interact with our minds and bodies so that we can engage in a way that actually supports rather than detracts from our overall well-being.
Well said.
We really hope this deep dive has provided some valuable insights, maybe sparked some awareness about your own relationship with the scroll. We encourage you to take a moment, perhaps later today, just to reflect on those questions we posed, and maybe even experiment with one or two of the practical tips we discussed.
Small changes can make a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We look forward to exploring more fascinating topics with you in future discussions right here.